Still Poddable, still Poddable. The Boston Celtics still Poddable, still Poddable. Oh yeah! Still Poddable, still Poddable. The Boston Celtics still Poddable, still Poddable. Better 19. Beat Rob, Jim, Packard, J. King. Still Poddable, still Poddable. The Caesar on the court to get another ring. Still Poddable, still Poddable. Everybody in the chat now sing. Still Poddable, still Poddable, still Poddable, still Poddable. The Boston Celtics still Poddable, still Poddable. Oh yeah! Shut your ass up, man.
Daddy's always happening here.
Welcome back to Still Poddable, the best Celtics podcast here on Al Gore's Internet. I am Sam Jam Packard, joined by Brian B. Robb from MassLive.com. We are 2/3 of Still Poddable, the best Celtics podcast on Al Gore's Internet. I said that already, but it's worth saying again. We are Monday through Friday Boston Celtics podcast. You can mostly find us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Still Poddable. We got a podcast for you every single day, Monday through Friday. We also do one free show every week, and this is that free show. So you're on the CLNS YouTube page. There's also a free podcast. That means today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. B-Rob, we are in the fun week of the season where there is no basketball. And what do podcasters do when they're struggling for content and there's no new games? That's right. It's a mailbag, folks. It's a mailbag. Thanks to the podfather himself, Bill Simmons, for inventing the mailbag. I don't know if he invented the mailbag, but it feels like he did. So we're going to be answering questions from the fine folks of the Still Poddable community, a community you could be a part of if you go to patreon.com/Still Poddable. We have a very lively chat, and you'll see from the questions we've gotten today and for tomorrow's podcast, we got some interesting folks with some brains, working in creative ways, I'll say.
And we're overdue for one of these, to be perfectly honest. I can't remember. I think it's been at least a month, 2 months. And so people brought the goods, and we're going to be doing 2 parts here, starting with tonight. And I look forward to what our community has up their sleeve here.
Yeah, I look forward to discovering some wisdom with the fine folks of Still Poddable chat. I do want to get to the news of the day, though. I mean, we are a news-based program. You and Jay are card-carrying members of the Professional Basketball Writers Association. Lonnie Walker is now a member of the Philadelphia 76ers. I didn't know if he was going to make it back to the NBA, but good for Lonnie Walker. I mean, not great for him. He still has to play on the Sixers, but he's made it back to the NBA, which was what he wanted to do.
Yeah, it's kind of, I don't know if you saw, there was a report initially. His agent told Mark Stein that he wasn't coming to the NBA, and then that was around noontime, and then
that's called negotiation.
And then Daryl Morey's like, "Oh no, need to figure this thing out."
He's got a multi-year deal, right?
Yeah, so I think it's I believe it was Cal Newbeck reported it's a team option for year 2. So Philly gets a look, and if he plays well, obviously they'll retain him for the minimum. But yeah, I mean, if you're Philly, it's honestly like, why did it take them this? Like they've got Brady, they had the man formerly known as Reggie Jackson, like playing regular minutes off the bench for them for a while, along with Eric Gordon and Kyle Lowry. So at least Lonnie Walker is, I don't know if he's great, but he's at least in his prime. He's 26 years old. So it's he should be at least give you a little bit more than those guys, you would think. And now he should get a chance in this team with the injury luck they've had. And it doesn't sound like he'll be in uniform for the game against the Celtics on Thursday.
I was hoping for a Lonnie Walker revenge game on Thursday. That's too bad.
Right. The customs, getting a visa these days might not be the easiest thing quickly. But I think he'll get a chance at the least. And yeah, it's good for him. It's good to see him. I think all things considered, if luxury tax issue wasn't there for the Celtics this year, he probably would have been that 15th guy all year long. And so glad he gets a chance somewhere else to do it.
Yeah, I feel like he immediately becomes part of the rotation for the Sixers. So good for Lonnie Walker. The other news of the day, I don't know if this actually counts as news, but Chris Haynes just tweeted out, Dennis Smith Jr. is coming back from Europe. And I only bring this up to remind folks that for some reason, the night Dennis Smith Jr. got drafted with the 6th pick in the NBA draft, I was at his draft party. Does it make any sense? No. Was I a fish out of water? Absolutely. Did I celebrate with the fine folks of his family from North Carolina? You betcha. Was he under 21, so no one was really drinking alcohol? Also correct. But that's just a fun little memory.
What's the backstory, though? How'd you maneuver into that?
Friend of the program, Nick Friedman, was like, before he was a Hornets coach or before he got into the league, was made his money running pre-draft camps. And so he ran Dennis Drift's he ran Terry Rozier's pre-draft. He ran Dennis Smith Jr., Kevin Knox's pre-draft camp. I mean, all the stars are aligning for the Nick Friedman camp. And so I was just in New York. Nick Friedman was in New York. And so we ended up at Dennis Smith Jr.'s draft party. And does Dennis Smith Jr. have any idea who I am? Absolutely not. But it's I was there. There's a lot of fun situations that I've been found myself in just because I've been friends with Nick Friedman. That reminds me of another story. And I know we said this was a mailbag, but I just best story like this that it's ever happened. Summer League 2017. Nick Friedman is very close with the Pargo twins. If you remember, the
point guard, right?
Pargo, yeah, well, two of them both are trying to make it in the league. We're in Vegas, and Nick's not with the team yet, but he gets a call being like, "Hey, we're trying to just run a pickup game, trying to run a workout at this gym. Can you come like help us out?" And he's like, "Sure." And I kind of just tag along. Who else is there but Joe Johnson? And this is like not prime Joe Johnson, but like 2016, 2017.
Still in the league, Joe Johnson.
Still in the league, Joe Johnson, well before Celtics Joe Johnson. And so they run a workout, and then they are like, all right, we're going to run 5s. And I'm looking around.
No.
There's only 11 people in this gym. Obviously, I didn't get picked for the first game.
But you're ready to sub, though.
Someone in the Pargo's crew was just like playing there, but he was really out of shape. So he calls off after the first game. So then I start running pickup, and on my team, it's me, Nick, and Joe Johnson. And against, I think, both Pargo brothers and whoever filled in. And the three of us ran that court. Man, that was probably my best pickup performance ever. Just dishing the ball to Joe Johnson. I was knocking down corner threes. It was one of the highlights of my basketball playing career. It was just me, Nick, my like good friend from kindergarten, and Joe Johnson just running shit in a Las Vegas high school gymnasium. It was amazing.
Holy crap, Packard. I can't believe I've heard this story before. This is like, do you guys play? Where'd you play it? Was it like the Impact Gym or something like that?
It was at a random high school. I don't know how we even got access to it. It was awesome. Then later that night, as a thank you, we get invited to Joe Johnson's like VIP section at a Migos concert at a place in LA or in Las Vegas. And so just imagine me hanging out with a bunch of NBA players at a Migos concert. It was a wild evening, and I'll leave that story at that.
Wow. So your basketball career peaked in 2017, it sounds like then. That like you're playing pickup with NBA guys and you had a good game. Like that will never be topped.
I distinctly remember just like catching the ball at the top of key and immediately swinging the ball to Joe Johnson in the corner, and he knocked down a 3, and he gave me like a point. Like, you made the right play. And I was like, you're damn right I did, ISO Joe. It wasn't ISO Joe though. ISO Joe's played a good solid basketball. I'm glad I didn't have to guard him though.
What was it your matchup? Like who are you? Did you have to switch on the one of the Pargos at some point? Like,
I'm sure I did, but that's the thing about the pickup is you just kind of you just make sure you don't hurt anyone.
Right.
And you put your hand up and you lightly contest, but in that you just let the NBA players do NBA player stuff. You don't have to like try that hard. And it was a lot of fun though. That was probably the top moment.
That's great stuff. I don't have anything. The closest I have to that is doing pickup with a bunch of NBA front office people at the Sloan convention. I'm sure you played one of those over the years. Yeah, that's also fun. They're a lot less. Not as good. I can hold my own in that matchup somewhat. But that is not that's awesome, Packard. Good for you.
It was cool. And like, that wasn't even planning on telling that story. It just came up. So thanks to Dennis Smith Jr. and the news for getting us into that.
Who needs the mailbag? We need more old Packard Vegas stories is what we need right now.
Well, I got a lot of other Vegas stories that
there was another one. I've definitely heard one from you and Jay. I don't know if that's for on air one, but that's
it's not, but we'll just say shout out to a friend of the podcast, George Hill. Let's get into some of the questions here. We're going to go start off this one from Patty the Batty, which nice to see you, Patty Batty. I haven't seen you in chat, but thanks for asking a question. This one's somewhat relevant, and it's kind of everyone's got ideas about how to fix the All-Star game, and Patty the Batty asks, should the winner of the All-Star game in an East-West format have the following: home court in the finals and the top 5 draft picks that go to that conference bottom teams instead of the lottery? I like the thinking outside the box, but I just don't like trying to bring stakes to the All-Star game because I feel like it's a meaningless thing.
Well, what was the year MLB tried to do that for like 5 or 10 years? I feel like.
Yeah, because the game ended in a tie. They ran out of pitchers, and then they did that. And I was actually thinking about that recently. Were any of those subsequent World Series changed because of home court? And that's the thing. It's crazy about baseball. Home team really matters. I feel like a lot more just in terms of final ups and able to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big advantage in baseball.
It's a huge advantage in baseball. I think it'd be less so. I'm trying to think of recent NBA finals that you can feel like were really swayed by home court advantage, but it does make an impact. But I don't know. It feels like a kind of a last ditch effort. The lottery thing is never gonna happen. I like it's thinking outside the box. I like it, but that doesn't incentivize the players in the game. The players in the game do not care at all about lottery picks.
Agree.
They might care about home court advantage. I heard the Bill Simmons variation of this was where only players from the top 5 teams in each conference play in the A-level All-Star game. I just don't think players will still kind of care that much about home court advantage. I don't think players care that much. I don't know. I don't know if
it would be funny to see though. Some players would care, like Jason and Jalen would care, but other players on lottery teams probably wouldn't care at all if those were the stakes. The All-Star. So that would be somewhat entertaining, maybe. Some guys are trying, some are not, some are getting pissed at each other. But yeah, I can't see the stakes being raised to that level where especially given what happened in MLB where they did it for a few years and then they pulled it back when they realized, okay, that's not the best use of it. So I don't know. I think it's they're gonna have to keep throwing shit at the wall here and experiment, and maybe they'll eventually get lucky on something, but I don't think what we saw this year was it.
I think what we saw this year could have been it if you didn't have multiple sideshows and game interruptions.
Yes.
Or
playing to 40 is just a ridiculous number to play to.
I feel like they figured it out in the COVID year. The first 3 quarters, it was the winner of the quarter goes to charity, and then they had an Elam ending.
Yeah.
I feel like that's just fine, and you just make it a basketball game, and I don't know. It's every time you change the rules, it new becomes just overhyped. But just treat it what it is. It's an NBA convention. It's like Comic-Con. Just have the game on Sunday and just don't make it seem like if it's not competitive. I feel like Adam Silver painted himself into a corner where he's just set himself up to be so embarrassed. If you don't raise the stakes so much and you realize, oh, it's just a fun exhibition where it doesn't really matter if it's competitive or not, and people are going to have fun. And it's not a big a deal if it's just not this most competitive thing. I don't know why we need the All-Star game to be a competitive thing. Would it be very cool if that happened? Yes. Is the reality of the situation that the players have way too much on their plates and are risking way too much to play in an exhibition when they're trying to ramp themselves up for the playoffs? Also, yes. So it just doesn't feel realistic anymore.
Yeah, it's just we're past that part of NBA history where these players are going to do that. And you look at NHL now, the 4 Nations thing obviously was a big hit from an entertainment standpoint. But now you also have a bunch of guys that got hurt in that and we're probably going to miss time for their real teams. And clearly, I think the NBA is none of these guys in the NBA obviously want to go that route, but the international versus US thing, I feel like will be tried at some point.
Go for it. If Wemby plays, he's going to care. That's my biggest takeaway is that Wemby loves to compete. USA versus International, just watching the new Netflix documentary about the Olympics is pretty fun. There was a great clip of Evan Fournier trying to trash the USA team for having no chemistry, and then Kevin Durant just goes, "Chemistry doesn't matter when you have to guard Steph. Like, that's not going to help you whatsoever." It turns out he was pretty correct. So that was fun. I don't know. All-Star games, it's an exhibition. It's going to be an exhibition. I think that's going to be fine. You know what? But we're getting back to real basketball on Thursday, B-Rob. And I think if you want to make some money with the return to basketball action, I would recommend going to our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks allows you to win 1,000 times your money. It's the best way to get in on action in more than 30 states, including California, Texas, Georgia, and Florida. And it's very, very easy. You just choose higher or lower on a number of different player props. I was actually at the Knicks game against the Celtics. I turned $50 into $200 just playing the feel of the Boston Celtics. I knew Peyton Pritchard was going to get more than, I think, 3 assists. I could feel Kristaps Porzingis actually didn't play that game. He was a late scratch. But the fine folks at Prize Picks just kind of dealt with that for me. I didn't even have to worry about that. I knew Jalen Brunson was going to go off. It was a real easy way just to have some fun watching the basketball game. So if you want to do the same, go to Prize Picks, download the app today, use promo code CLNS. You also get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the Prize Picks app today. Use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, B-Rob, we're diving back into the mailbag. It's a rather long one from Brendan. I don't know if I want to read all that. Let's go to Grant, Gambling Grant, one of the legends.
Yes.
Who is your pick for MVP this year? I mean, the Bontemps straw poll came out, and it seemed like a 2-man race. And I'm going to add a little adjustment to this. Who's your pick? And then what does Jason Tatum need to do, not to become the MVP, but to put himself in contention for maybe being a top 2 MVP ballot? Because I don't know if he's necessarily going to win it. It does feel like it's a Jokic or SGA thing. But he's been playing some pretty phenomenal basketball here over the last couple of days. Or not days, weeks.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised. I think he was 4th in the last one that came out, and probably should be 3 at this point, just based on how good he's been. And I don't know if it was Giannis that was 3rd at this point, but it seems backwards, and that might change with injuries. But I would say what it needs to happen for him to leapfrog into that conversation for real would be the Celtics catching the Cavs, like in some type of historic, like they're 5.5 back with 25 games to go here. Like that would turn a lot of heads if they pulled that off with Tatum leading the way. And you need one of those other guys, unfortunately, to get hurt or miss sometime. Not like the rest of the season, but like be maybe just at the threshold. And so yeah, I think, but it's like the problem for Tatum, and will continue to be, I think this will ultimately change later this decade when the Celtics lose some of this firepower inevitably because of the luxury tax stuff down the line. And Tatum will have to just carry a heavier onus. But for now, he doesn't. And does great at, having go nuts in third quarters here or there, but making the right pass. And he's not going to put up the 15 like Jokic does because the Celtics don't need him to. And they have other guys to rebound, et cetera, and handle the ball. But as far as my MVP pick goes, I think it's Jokic. Like, it has to be. And the voter fatigue thing, I think, will very much be real. If what do you think? Like the Thunder, I feel like if they get close to like over 65 wins, I think that that might be the tiebreaker for people. Be like, all right, SGA, we need to mix this up here. SGA gets it, but do you feel like is there anything for you that SGA can do to get it?
No, it's just like every number points to Jokic. Like I've also watched basketball over the last 4 years. Just like Jokic is a singular talent that I've never seen before. SGA is damn good.
Yeah.
But also it feels like Jokic is has less around him. I think the thing that's interesting to me about SGA is it feels like Tatum gets knocked because he has very talented teammates like Jaylen Brown, like Derek White, like KP. But then SGA, obviously, I think has a much higher like usage rate with the Thunder and is much more of like I don't think the Thunder are super heliocentric, but compared to the Celtics, it's more focused on SGA. But it's like the Thunder simultaneously want people to credit Jalen Williams for being this all-star, but then also SGA is like the singular talent on their team. And so it's kind of this weird double speak where it's like either Jalen Williams is an all-star and that should like hurt SGA's MVP chances, or he's not an all-star and SGA is doing this all alone. I think you can kind of work that argument with whatever way you want to. And me as a non-Jalen Williams believer, that's how I'm going to choose to do it. But it's Jokic. Like, he's the most talented basketball player I've seen in person in the last 3 years. If voter fatigue happens, I feel like it's natural. But like, I just don't see how you can just look at Jokic's performances and not make him MVP. And it feels like he's having a better statistical season this year than he has the past 2 years. And so I don't know how you don't reward that. I get that you like, I feel like I'm not a big NFL guy, but from my understanding, that's kind of what happened with Josh Allen over Lamar Jackson, so like voter fatigue is real, but it's also stupid. Like, that's not how awards should work.
Agreed. And the thing going up for Jokic now too is like Denver's figured it out lately. Like, they're a half game behind Memphis now for the 2 seed. And so that was the one knock you could have him. Like, oh, the Nuggets were kind of like bottom half of the West playoff picture early in the year, but they're coming along now and they've overcome a lot of injuries. I mean, he's making Westbrook look good at this stage of career, which tells you kind of like what he's doing as far as elevating teammates that we've known for years. But now taking it to that level, it'll probably all fall apart in the playoffs. But as far as the regular season goes, that's another notch in his belt for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I heard talk recently, I forget what podcast I was listening to, but it was is Russell Westbrook the most improved player in the which I think would be a wild award for him to win. I don't think he is going to, but he feels like he's kind of like actually fit in nicely in that role and like has really embraced playing with Jokic and knows that he can just like Russell Westbrook never stops moving. And like, that's kind of the perfect player to play with Jokic, because if you just are constantly moving and cutting, he's going to find you because he has like the best vision of any and is taller than everyone else. And so kudos, it's got to be Jokic, but I would like to see, at least to the next Bontemps straw poll, I'd like to see Tatum at third place, but that would involve him playing, as well as he has over the most kind of recent stretch. All right. Next mailbag question. This one's from Steven. With Kornet's improved play and hopefully a healthy KP for the playoffs, do you think the Celtics will continue to lean into the double big lineups, or is that the first to go if someone from the starting lineup doesn't have it, or is that the first go-to if someone doesn't have it? For Drew, for example, and just like thinking about that question in terms of playoff matchups like Knicks, Cavs, OKC, what do you think the double bigs situation in the playoff is going to be? Because the numbers for the double bigs are phenomenal.
Yeah, I think at this point you're playing it no matter what. How much you play it, again, will depend on who's out there and how it looks. But the sample size of it during the regular season speaks for itself of just how dominant. Like the net rating as being in like over +10 for like whether it's Al Cornet or Porzingis Cornet or Al Porzingis has been not as good but still very strong. And the good news is I think a lot of those teams do, like, you can get away with playing it. Like we just saw it happen against the Knicks the other night, where they pretty much went to it for close to 48 minutes, and that worked well. Now, because when you have Mitchell Robinson out there, whoever comes back, like I guess it was a little easier because OG was out that night, but by and large, like you can hide him enough somewhere in those matchups, like even on a Josh Hart, like you can just make that work, I think, to certainly get it out there, because I just think defensively Packard, those duos have been so good for this team this year that like you have to go to that until it's played off the floor at some point.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting because it's clearly, I feel like, the better defensive lineups, and I don't feel like their offense has necessarily suffered that much with Kornet on the court? Like, you think Kristaps and Al on the court together, it's still like a very spaced floor where you could hypothetically play 5 out. You're just not going to play 5 out with Kornet. But Kornet's been very good at the guy who sets the pick and just makes the right read on the roll. You can throw it to him on the roll, and he's making the right catch and or the right pass. And with you could have Al in the corner. You don't really have Kristaps in the corner as much, but you can still like play kind of a pick and pop game. And so I think the big question is, when things slow down in the playoffs, does your offense kind of look stagnant? Do you need more spacing out there? Do you need that 5 out? Because the 5 out hasn't really been their best look this year, but it feels like such a dynamic thing to be able to do in the playoffs when the offense does slow down, when you're playing more half-court basketball. And so I think that's going to be fascinating to see, is like the starting lineup of last year, the championship lineup. The net rating has gotten a lot better. It was negative for a good stretch there. But I think it's also interesting, and I think we got a question about this as well, is like, do we see a 5 out lineup with Peyton Pritchard instead of Drew Holiday out there? Because Drew hasn't been, the same Drew he was last year. I think Peyton Pritchard's played well enough, and we've seen enough crunch time lineups with Peyton Pritchard closing instead of Drew, where I definitely think that's a possibility.
Yeah, all those options are on the table at this point, just based on how this year has gone. And the other thing with Kornet, offensively, is the offensive rebounding. Like, that's a huge, like, that kind of disappears for this team when he's or Nemi are off the floor. Like, Al's not in there being on the boards. Porzingis can't, but that's like, again, he's stretching the floor more than doing that most nights, and you get the corner crashes and stuff like that. But Kornet just adds that element, being like, okay, if you got a team scrambling on the perimeter to try to take away a 3 from Tatum or Jalen or Derek White, then Kornet gets the great position down low and for the putback dunk or just the kick out 3. And so that has kind of been an underrated part of his game as well for this in those lineups, I feel like. And so that's gonna be something to watch. And then, like you said, playoffs is a different animal. Like, teams are going to go after him defensively more. He's going to have to guard the perimeter more. That isn't going to work against everyone, but he's made strides there. Peyton Pritchard obviously has been the far better offensive player than Drew Holiday this year. So whether you want to lean into offense or lean into defense, like, Joe Mazzulla is going to have some decisions to make this playoffs, and it's going to be fascinating to see what he goes with on certain nights.
Yeah, I think it's one point. It's beneficial because he has kind of a flexibility to mix and match and see what works. On the other hand, I feel like what made the last year's Celtics so great is that you could roll out that 5-man lineup, and you just slid Al in for Kristaps for most of the playoffs, and it was just 5 guys who could really play two-way. I could see if Kornet's out there, obviously he's not as like an offensive threat. Pritchard's out there, he plays solid defense in terms of like ball pressure, but he still immediately becomes a target on defense for like bigger wings. And so it just creates a little bit of a weakness on one of those ends, which is like what the closing 5 last year didn't have. So I wouldn't be shocked to see them going back to kind of that original 5, just because.
Yeah, your default's the starting 5, no doubt.
Yeah. But we'll see. And I think that's something to important to look at as the season closes out. All right. We have a bunch of questions from L.E. Ellie is the mailbag goat, just always comes with phenomenal questions, mostly absurdist. I like that a lot. We'll try to get a few from Ellie here. My friend Nick, who's in law school, wants me to ask Jam, what would I need to pay you or do in return for taking my evidence midterm tomorrow? I am an ethical lawyer, and I would never take a evidence midterm for anyone. But in a hypothetical world where I was unethical, I'd do it for $500. You didn't have to. I don't have to pass it. I just have to see how much I have to remember from the bar exam. Like, I know basic rules about hearsay and evidence and foundations and stuff like that. I think it would be a fun exercise. How much money would you take, B-Rob, to take an evidence midterm?
500. Give me 200.
Yeah,
I've been taking
an hour and a half of my time.
Well,
that's not too bad.
This if you were to take the bar like tomorrow, right now, what's your confidence level? Like, how much are you retaining at this point? Obviously you're retained. This is real. You retains a ton of it, but with me now, like memorizing stuff, jam packing stuff into my brain, it's been a bit of a fall off from like 20 years ago. College me would be able to pull it off and retain a lot of it. Now I'm like, give me a week or two later, I might be struggling a little bit.
I think with certain subjects, I got it. Criminal law, down. That's my profession. Constitutional law, I know it. Civil procedure, I know nothing. Property law, I don't even start.
I want more property law questions. Those are
contract law. Like I'm just looking at my textbooks. Like torts. What's the punishment of an abnormally dangerous animal who comes onto someone else's property? That's strict liability. So there are certain nuggets I still remember. I'm not going to go as bold and to say that I could pass the bar right now, but I think I could put up a respectable failing score if I had to take the bar tomorrow.
Right. That's that rule.
I think that's I am a lawyer. I do this most days. Another one from Ellie. I think this is a great question. What's the most electric sports environment you've ever been in? Ideally, one Celtics and one non-Celtics. What's the wildest sports Celtics environment you think you've ever been in?
Yeah. So the obvious one is like Game 5 of the Finals, like Pritchard's half court make buzzer beater. I think if we're gonna go like last year Finals run, it got pretty electric during like the year Isaiah in the fourth quarter would just take it over every single game, because I mean the Celtics crowd loves that. Like, they love that guy to this day, understandably so. But he just had some insane runs, and anytime you're watching a 5'9", 10 guy do it, it just adds to the luster of average Joe fan. So that, like, the building got really crazy.
The game after his what was it? His sister died.
Oh yeah, yep.
Against the Wizards.
Wizards. Yep.
That was Game 7. Kelly Olynyk was a pretty wild environment. The thing that comes to my mind, and this might have just been because where I was seated for it, but back in the old days, I'm part of the less than media, and they would sit us just like on the baseline at these random tables, and you're just like directly surrounded by the fans. And so for this one game, I was in that section. I don't think I was assigned for that section. I was assigned to be up on 9, but I saw a seat and moved down, which is a savvy vet move for those less than media members. But I was just amongst the fans, and this was a random regular season game against the Rockets, but where they had that miraculous comeback where Marcus Smart drew multiple charges on James Harden. Like, that was one of the most like bananas crowds I've ever been a part of. And I just remember, because when you're in the media section, you are normally surrounded by other media members, or you're up on 9, you're kind of removed from the situation. This one, I was just like surrounded by the fans. And I just remember people going absolutely crazy because that was an improbable comeback. And that was like
25, came from 25 down or something like that. That was a nuts game.
And just an absolutely wild ending.
Yeah. There were a few of those like that. As far as regular season games, that probably like tops the list of the ones I was at in terms of how wild that crowd got for that game. For doing non-Celtics, tell you what, like, have you ever been to the Big East tournament?
I have not.
That is like went back in the day. Like, my brother went to Providence, and so I got to like go on the floor because he was in like the band, and that like the atmosphere in that at the Old Garden with like some of those teams back in like the old Big East days was phenomenal. And then I went to like Game 3 of like Red Sox A's, and I think it was 2000. It was probably 2004, like in the World Series year when they won in extra innings, and just again Fenway back then was just out of control, insane. So those are the ones that come to mind for me.
Yeah, all mine are going to be Red Sox games. I was at the game where Pedro threw down Don Zimmer.
Oh my God.
But I was in standing room only seats, and not seats. I was standing behind the Jumbotron in deep center field. And so we just see a melee, like Manny Ramirez reacts. And so we have no idea what happens. and someone sees Zimmer go down, and I remember someone yelling, "Ortiz just threw a bat!" And so like that's before smartphones. Like we had no idea what was going on. So for like at least a half hour there, definitely thought Ortiz threw a bat at Don Zimmer. That was pretty electric environment. The 2013 World Series, I was a production assistant for MLB Network, and so I got to go all of those games. And that was when they had Shane Victorino, and they would sing like Three Little Birds before his at bat.
Yep.
So they sing Three Little Birds, and I think he hit a bases loaded double to like basically win the game for I was about to say win the game for the Celtics, but basically put the Celtics up in the, again, I said Celtics, put the Red Sox up in the clinching game. It was basically like, oh, we're going to win the World Series. And I just remember like they had crammed so many people into that because it was a clinching game. And it was like people, I was basically back by the TV truck. So you could just see people sneaking in left and right. Like that must've been thousands of people over capacity. And this, like the stands were shaking for that. After he hit that double. So that was probably the most electric non-Celtics environment I can remember.
Glory days. A lot of crazy crowds back at Fenway.
Yeah. I mean, back in the day, you could just get a Yankee suck chant going for no reason at all. That's the good old fashioned Boston where it's just, a Yankee suck chant at a random Celtics game in December. That's when hatred was good and pure. Let's go out on this one. I think it's a pretty thought-provoking question. It's from B. Chris. If we were all Sesame Street characters, he says, B-Rob's Bert, I'm Ernie, and Jay is who?
I mean, Oscar, right?
Yeah, I mean, the natural pick is Oscar the Grouch. I could also, Guy Smiley. He kind of looks like Guy Smiley.
Yeah, he's got the look. Yep.
He's got the Guy Smiley look. I don't know if he has the Guy Smiley personality. If they're doing pure personality, it's got to be Oscar the Grouch.
Yeah, that's a landslide. Yeah, that's. I haven't watched Sesame Street. I wonder if they. Who else do you have? There's like Elmo, Big Bird, and
Snuffleupagus, the Count.
The Count, yeah.
Oh, Jay's probably not very good at math.
No.
Yeah, no, I think he's got the looks of Guy Smiley and the personality of Oscar the Grouch. I mean, I thought the question would be thought provoking, but it really was straight down.
That's just it's a gimme right there.
You're gonna have to ask this question again, when you do this with Jay tomorrow. But Shane asked, could Jay King dunk back in the day? I don't think he could. Do you think he could?
I want to say yes, because he's had bad knees for a while. So I want to say maybe not dunk.
He was a college athlete. Like,
he was a college athlete.
He was on the basketball team. He's like what, 6'1"? He should be able to dunk at Skidmore.
Like not in a game, but I bet he could do it at some point.
Oh, you could do it in layup lines.
Yeah. But we'll throw that to Jay.
We'll throw that to Jay. All right, a couple more questions here. This one's from Robbie. In ancient history, how did Jay and Jam meet and then come up with the idea of the podcast? We did not come up with an idea for the podcast. There was 17 different podcasts that all coalesced into this one beautiful moment of Still Poddable. I don't know. I started doing a podcast with on WEEI in like 2014. Jay and John Corrales started doing a podcast called The Reigning Jays. Then I started doing a podcast with Jared Weiss, still on WEEI. Then they went to a daily format, The Reigning Jays, and asked me to join. That's how I became Jam Packard, which is a tough thing I've had to explain on a lot of dates. Is like, oh, so your online persona is Jam? I was like, yeah, it's like that, but like also a slam dunk. Then Jay was working.
Do you bring that up though? Do you like volunteer that, or they?
I try to avoid the podcast thing as much as possible, but then like they're like, so what do you do with your free time? And it's like, well, I watch the Celtics and then I talk about the Celtics, and then it kind of naturally comes up that way. And then I don't know. It depends on how it's going, but And
No,
if I'm trying to brag, then I'll be like, oh, I have 13,000 Twitter followers, and then they can see my name's J.M. Packard, or that's my name on my Instagram, so that's stupid. Yeah, then completing the story, then Jay was at The Athletic, and The Athletic said he couldn't do other podcasts. He had to do his own podcast. And then I followed Jay to The Athletic because I wanted clout. Then The Athletic punished me for that decision by canceling anything is Poddable. So we started Still Poddable. And then about a week after that, we were like, hey, B-Rob should join the podcast. And then he did. And that's where we are today.
It's magical. So what year? It was like 2016, 2017.
I first started doing Raining Jays in the 2016-2017 season because I was actually here in Philadelphia going to Penn. And the crazy thing is, me and Corrales started doing post-game podcasts together, and I had never met the man in person. I didn't meet Corrales in person until he was still a news producer back in New York at those days.
Right.
So wild times. I don't remember why they asked me to join the podcast because no one listened to Jared and I's podcast on WEI. But they apparently like my stupid jokes. And so now you guys are stuck with me.
And they knew you would be willing to change your name to Jam.
They did. that was part of it. Let's go out on one last question here. If you could be a guest on any podcast, what would you choose and why? A lot of podcast talk to end the show.
This is a good one. I mean, I grew up listening to like Bill Simmons' podcast. I guess that's like an easy give me one. I feel like that's like our generation. Like he was the first big sports podcast, or if you're from Boston, odds are you're listening to that.
He invented the sports podcast. The thing is, would you want to be on Simmons's podcast if you didn't have a lot to talk about? I feel like I would be disappointed. I feel like oh, here's a guy. Oh, he also likes the Celtics. You guys are just gonna like, I don't know necessarily what I would add to that conversation.
Just riff about the 2004 Red Sox.
Yeah, that works.
Right. What would you have?
I'm a big fan of Stavros Halkias, Stavi's World. He's a comedian and he does an advice podcast. Clearly, I like answering people's questions, and that's just all goofing. But again, I'm not a stand-up comedian, so I feel like I would disappoint in that. I'm also a big fan of the show Pablo Torre Finds Out, because they do like cool news journalist stuff, but like I wouldn't be on that part. That would be on the random hanging out part they do at the end of the week. And so that would be, I think would be fun. But again, I feel like I would need to have accomplished something to be a guest on these shows. I'd have a real imposter syndrome being a guest on a podcast. Instead, I just host my own podcast.
You're a pro. I mean, you're a podcast pro for 10 years now.
10 years. I do.
Don't hang your head on that.
I started the original We Hate Dwayne Wade podcast in 2014, well before podcasts were a thing. I saw the vision, and I do take credit for that. Did anyone listen to that? No. Did WEI management tell us we had to change the name of that show rather quickly? Yes. Did it quickly become the We Love Anthony Davis podcast? Yes. Another fun fact. But I was in on the podcast game early. I thought it would be a viable medium, and turns out I was right. It's only exploded. Now we're oversaturated with podcasts, not just podcasts in general, but Celtics podcasts. Everyone has a podcast, but we got the best one here. It's Still Poddable, the best one on Al Gore's internet. That's going to do it for today's mailbag, folks. We didn't get to as many questions as I thought we would, but does not matter because Jay and B-Rob will be back tomorrow to answer the rest of them. If you want to hear all the answers to those questions, go to patreon.com/stillpoddable. We are here for you every single day, Monday through Friday. We'll be back again tomorrow with more mailbag responses. And then basketball is back with another game here in Philadelphia. We'll have another podcast for you right after that. And we'll just keep on rolling along as the Celtics try to get playoff positioning and get ready for the playoffs. For B-Rob, for Guy Smiley / Oscar the Grouch, I am Jam Packard. This has been another episode of Still Poddable!
Still Poddable, still Poddable. The Boston Celtics still Poddable.